Okay, Mr. Wilson, number 20.
The next one is the proposed ordinance, drone ordinance, I'll call it. And again, I'm going to ask the chief to present this item to you tonight.
Mayor, members of council, I'm hoping I can get through this one a little quicker. Sorry. But the drone ordinance is something that came about as a product of a lot of things, and I'll try to just give you a brief history of that. Our aircraft pilots and supervisory crew down at the heliport who pilot our 3 police helicopters came to us with concerns a little over a year ago. They had an interaction with a drone while they were working 2 simultaneous scenes. They were following a pursuit, and at the same time there was a fatal accident working in the area. The drone was attempting to film the fatal accident, interfered with our helicopter operations to the point where it was a safety issue for them. That was one of the first interactions. There's been multiple since that our helicopters had with drones. And then the topic really started to take off with more and more drones coming into the marketplace. So we put together a working group in the city of staff from different departments, and I'll get into kind of the rest of it, but I wanted to give you that as a preview. Currently, there's over 1 million drones that have been sold in the United States. Estimates are that there'll be 7 million drones out in the public use by 2020. There are both recreational and commercial drone users throughout Huntington Beach. You heard in the public comments are also referred to as unmanned aerial vehicles, or UAVs. The Orange County Grand Jury issued a report earlier this year. They recommended that each city adopt their own ordinance in an effort to gain local control over drones, the threat to safety of aircraft, as well as the threat to safety overhead of people, in addition to privacy concerns. Again, the need for the ordinance, multiple close calls with aircraft, including the Huntington Beach helicopters and our pilots. We have encountered several dangerous drone crashes, one of which I witnessed personally during the U.S. Open of Surfing 2 years ago into a crowd on the corner of PCH and Main over by Jack's. We had one at the Duckathon this year that crashed into PCH. We've had other ones as well that have interfered with special events and caused us problems at special events. The other need for an ordinance is the FAA rules are evolving, and there is little enforcement of the FAA rules away from the airport. So there are not FAA inspectors or police officers going around enforcing drone ordinances. And with the numbers of drones that we have in our community, we want to give our officers a tool that they have to help enhance public safety when they are out and encounter a drone operating in a dangerous environment. We've also had multiple privacy issues reported. Issues where a drone has flown over the top of where a person would reasonably expect privacy, like outside of the windows of condos over on Countess Drive in the harbor. We've had calls there where drones have been peering into windows with a camera on the high-rise, through the high-rise windows. We've had multiple people in backyards sunbathing in the privacy of their backyard complain that drones were flying overhead and either videotaping or monitoring them sunbathing. Whoops, sorry, the ordinance development, back to that, was a group of people from community services, from the police department and marine safety a little bit. We got just different input from all over, but essentially it was the police department conferring with the city manager's office, community services initially, and then the city attorney's office. There's hours of legal research into this by the city attorney's office. The FAA was consulted early on. When we had our first safety meeting over and planning meeting for the air show, they recommended that we adopt an ordinance prior to the air show, that we would have a method of local control of drones around the air show. They are going to be issuing a temporary flight restriction over the flight box for the air show, but they also recommended that in order to control some of the other issues that the drones will cause around the event, that we implement a local ordinance. So this was a collective effort. Just to sum up that last slide before we move on, it was a collective effort by multiple city departments. There was a lot of different versions of this ordinance. In iterations over the last 6 or 8 months. It's been an exhaustive work in progress, I think you would say. And we're one of the first agencies in Orange County to do this. There are several in LA County and other places that have done it. We're going to have to probably modify the ordinance down the road because the landscape is evolving continually because the technology is so new. But I think the consensus of the group was that we needed something in place sooner rather than later because of what was popping up. We had 4 or 5 drones videotaping the 4th of July fireworks. We had multiple drones over the top of the parade at different points that caused other hazards that I already talked about. So let me get into the ordinance specifically. I'm just going to highlight a few areas of the ordinance. There are many provisions that mirror the FAA rules, like requiring FAA registration, that they must be marked, the drones themselves must be marked with the FAA registration, that the vehicles, the unmanned vehicles or drones must maintain a line of sight, or the operator must maintain a line of sight with them. They have drones now that you can program a GPS coordinate into and they can fly out of your sight, and you can't control it once it leaves your sight. So that's the purpose of that. Other prohibited operations cannot fly within 2,000 feet of a city heliport. There's a no-fly zone that can be established by the city manager or the police chief or designee around a special event or any other incident that we need to. It's also prohibited to fly less than 300 feet over private property without their permission, or in the airspace where there is an expectation of privacy. An example like I just said. It might be public space out over the water, but it might be still peering through a window of a waterfront condo or home. Other prohibited operations are recording an image of a person readily identifiable when the person has an expectation of privacy when they're on private property. That goes to the sunbathing and other things. The last provision here is not prescribed yet. It was placed into the ordinance in anticipation. We've met with a technology company, and there is the current technology out there where a drone operator could just get online and type in some very limited information that they're going to be operating in an area. That would allow us to issue messages or rules to them when they sign up. It says, we're having an air show at the beach this weekend, you can't fly down in this area. It also would allow us, if we had an incident in a specific area, to implement flight restrictions. The technology even exists today where you could put geofencing up where the aircraft wouldn't go into the area based on the GPS coordinates that would be delivered through the manufacturer and when they sign up with us online. That's in the future, but we decided to put it in the ordinance because we think that the development of that is important, and we think it's also imminent if we do pass the ordinance. That's really the highlight. There's some other provisions in here. I think I captured some of the more significant ones, though, in the presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Councilmember O'Connell.
Yes, Chief, great presentation. I've got a quick question, for 1 or 2 quick questions. When you said over 300 feet, and so if somebody goes and flies over somebody's backyard at 300 feet, do they still have to get permission if somebody's in the backyard, whatever they're doing in their own personal backyard?
I think that 300 feet was put in. I'm not sure if that was an FAA regulation or not. The city attorney might be able to help answer that. I think it was put in there just to keep some reasonable expectation of privacy, and the 300 foot seemed like a reasonable level.
Now, does the FAA regulate that? Because I remember a couple of years ago there was something, I don't know if it was something similar, an ordinance that was brought in about regulating over the city, and it was actually overturned.
Yeah, so historically the FAA has had exclusive jurisdiction for the airspace 400 feet and above the ground surface.
400 feet? 400
feet above the ground surface and above the ground surface. So everything below that would be considered city or local jurisdiction. The FAA is lately modifying their position because of drones, and they are suggesting that they're going to move that threshold lower, perhaps all the way to the ground surface. So I think that answers your question. If you have any other questions about the FAA, I'd be happy to answer them.
I just want to follow up with you, Chief. Have you heard of the Metroplex?
Of the Metroplex?
Yes.
I've heard of it, but I don't know. I don't know. I don't have any information on it.
Okay. Basically, from what I'm led to believe, it's a new satellite which is going to be monitoring air traffic control systems, and it's due to be rolled out in early November to early spring. And the idea, this is more efficient airspace, and from what I'm led to believe, there will be 13% more air traffic in LA County and Orange County. So what eventually, I don't know if this is going to pertain to drones, but I just want to make folks aware of this, that we can expect more air traffic coming in over Orange County. But I don't know if this is going to impact the drones also or not.
I'm actually not aware of that, and I don't have any information on that.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Hardy.
And my first question's odd, I think. Is there anything illegal about getting a stool and peeking over your fence and taking a picture of your neighbor sunbathing?
No.
I've never contemplated it before, so oh, she actually wrote it down. The women thought of it.
No.
Now, so the drone thing would be, I mean, I understand the expectation of privacy in the backyard, but I don't understand the difference between flying a camera over and pointing it over.
It's almost like the anonymity of the internet, so you can fly the drone 5 houses down and look into somebody else's backyard versus
knowing your neighbor's
next door
creepy.
to. So I think it creates more of an opportunity for people to do it because of the anonymity.
Okay, just curious mostly. With the current technology, how would we enforce this ordinance at the beach during an event? I've sat on the lifeguard headquarters for a decade now on 4th of July. Whether fireworks were legal or illegal, they have never been legal on our beach, and yet that is not enforced at all. So if something on the ground isn't enforced, how are we going to enforce something flying through the air?
I can tell you there's no way we would enforce on all of the drones in the air, and we wouldn't eliminate drone operations, illegal, legal, or otherwise. But it would give our officers a tool. Most significant special events, we have interaction with drone operators where we request that they stop. Most of the time they do, but not oftentimes, but on a regular basis they don't. And we've had drones operating, one just the 4th of July, the operator was on the floor, the second floor of one of the bars with a balcony, flying it low and over the heads of spectators in the parade. We want to give our officers a tool to stop that. The one drone that we impounded recently under the old ordinance of model airplanes, we felt like that case wasn't sustainable and we gave it back and actually didn't pursue those charges on that person. We just want to give our officers a tool. So it's not necessarily one that will eliminate all the problems, but when they do encounter the problem, then they have an enforcement option or a tool available to them, especially when we don't get compliance when we ask somebody to stop.
Yeah. And I understand that need. Especially with a big event coming up. In the Economic Development Committee, the council members that are on it, we encouraged the discussion to include some of the well-known drone operators who post videos online and stuff. Was anybody included in this process?
Well, I know I had conversations with the gentleman who spoke in public comment well over a year ago and then recently, and I think Mr. Gates has as well.
Did we base this ordinance off of any model ordinance from another community?
I know the original draft was based off of a lot from LAPD's ordinance, but I think it's been modified considerably since then as well. So I think City Attorney would have more comment on that.
Yeah, the current draft is a result of many iterations, a lot of consultation with other ordinances from other jurisdictions, and a ton of research. As the chief said, the landscape is constantly changing. We believe that this is the best that can be had right now. If in 6 months the FAA changes their regulations again or comes out with different recommendations or knocks on our door and says, hey, you're stepping on our toes, we can come back and modify the ordinance. I mean, we have some agility when it comes to making modifications or accommodating changing circumstances in the future.
Have there been any communities that have had legal challenges they've had to defend with their ordinances?
Not that I know of, although, as was mentioned, it may have been in public comments, LA's, based on the way it's worded and based on the way the FAA regulations or recommendations are worded, LA's will likely be either challenged or they'll have to modify it, because there are inconsistencies or conflicts between those two. Beyond that, I don't know of any challenges. I don't know, do you know of any challenges?
I don't either, just the one that was in the letter that was submitted to the council is the only one I'm aware of, and I'm not aware of those specifics.
Yeah, this just isn't the kind of topic that I want to be the leader on, so.
No, and I anticipate even if there was a challenge, it would have to come from the FAA because they're the enforcement agency for their regulations. And I can't imagine it would be a blind lawsuit, a blindly filed lawsuit. I imagine that they would knock on our door, send us a letter and say, hey, you're not in compliance, you're stepping on our toes or whatever the issue is. I don't think that this is. Based on all of our research, and it's been hours and hours of research with FAA regulations and a tons of other case law, I believe that this is consistent and compliant, and it's not subject to challenge right now. That could be different in 6 months. Maybe the FAA will change their position. We have had, it's been 18 months, I think, at least, since the genesis of this, and no fewer than, I think, 4 FAA updates, or updates from the FAA. No fewer than 4 in the past 18 months. That's pretty fast for the federal government. So, you know, things may change, and our options are move forward with something that we're comfortable with based on the research that we've done, or do nothing, right? So I think moving forward with something and then making adjustments down the line is a reasonable approach.
So one of the examples was, you know, a drone that crashed on PCH and caused problems for traffic. What's the difference between that and don't throw a rock in PCH because that could cause problems with traffic?
Well, it's not intentional. So throwing a rock into a car is an intentional act or onto PCH. But if you're flying a drone and you have an accident and it lands and crash lands into a car, causes an accident, or in this case, actually a small child tried to run out into traffic to get the drone after it crashed, we just believe it causes a level of danger that we'd like to try to control a little bit. This is a very limited enforcement tool, and we're not looking to go out and prohibit drones from operating in our city.
So the traffic example is closer to something flying out of the, you know, bed of a truck while someone's moving, and they didn't strap everything down. And that's not intentional, and it disrupts traffic. And if it causes an accident, the car that had stuff fly out of it would be liable. I don't understand why we need something different.
We wouldn't be able to cite that person. There's no criminal liability or administrative liability from the city's perspective for the person that the drone crashed on PCH. And we have a lot of drone activity around those events where we're very crowded down at PCH, both with pedestrian and vehicular traffic.
Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem Sullivan.
I'm hearing a lot of theoreticals, but I want to share a personal experience that I had. You mentioned, Chief, a incident near Countess Drive, which is near my house. I was swimming in my pool with my grandson and family, and some butthead, and I measure things by football fields that I'm fairly familiar with, and they were no more than 50 feet over our pool, and they hovered. And I was a little upset, and I wish that I had had a 50-foot hand, because I would have grabbed that down and smashed it. And then the next thing I wish is that I would encounter the individual that was operating that, and it would be my pleasure to feed it to him.
Don't say
It's just a invasion of privacy, and I'm sure that idiot had a camera, probably. Have no idea who it was, but this is how it is going to affect people. And I'm not really that sensitive, but you can take that however you want. But it really infuriated me that something would do that, and that is an invasion of somebody's personal space, personal life. And as is pretty obvious, I'm still mad about it. So I'm ready to support this ordinance right now. Thank you.
Councilmember Delglaze.
Thank you, Mayor. Chief, actually, I had similar to Councilmember Sullivan. If you're in your backyard and there's one of these, what are your rights, the individual in their backyard? Can they do, I'm not going to shoot it down, but somehow if I found something I wanted to, what are my options as a private citizen if I don't want that thing flying over my backyard? Do I have any rights that way?
You don't.
Okay.
I mean, if you damage somebody else's property now and it was legally in that space, then you would be liable. Or you
It kind of
could
reminds me of
potentially be
that,
liable.
wasn't there a guy on one of the numbered streets that had a drone? It wasn't that far off the ground, and then somebody threw something at him and it broke? I don't know. My other question is, what is what's the penalty? What if suppose I'm flying the drone and I break the rule, whatever the rule is? What happens? I mean, does the officer cite me, or what's
It would
the
be a
consequence?
citation, typically a civil citation. It could be a misdemeanor, depending if it was aggravated. Usually,
Okay.
we handle these as civil municipal code violations, and the first offense, 250? No, it's not that. I can't remember the actual fine off the top of my head now.
So then I'd have to go to the person would have to go to our local prosecutor, right?
Yeah.
Our new local prosecutor. I do have some concerns just because a lot of our events at the beach, they're so crowded. And it is a little scary. I think, I do believe there's something, an ordinance that definitely has to be, I'd like to see it pass in order for us to have some kind of options to do something. And to Mr. Gates' point, if it needs to be changed or the FAA changes down the road, then we can adjust.
I do think, and just conferring with Captain Reinhardt real quick, it would be a lower level civil citation. It'd be 125.
Mayor, just one more comment too. There is an upcoming meeting apparently that ACC is hosting, a roundtable discussion on all these issues related to commercial and recreational drones. So there is a lot of discussion countywide. There'll be cities, county, fire folks, and police department folks attending this meeting in an attempt to kind of get a handle on it. So end of the month.
Councilmember Peters.
I have a few problems with it. One, the 2,000 feet from the heliport, that means they're not flying in Central Park.
Correct.
That's probably where I'd want anyone to fly, to train, and if I was going to have them fly anywhere in the city, it would be within that area. I know there's people who fly planes down at the softball fields too in the morning, that's within 2,000 feet.
That's actually illegal to fly the planes in the park. There is an ordinance against model airplanes, but the drones in Central Park, we believe, causes a safety threat to the helicopters taking off and landing.
Okay. Also, that with the air show, the FAA is they will be going from the ocean. They're going to have a no-fly zone. Yeah. So they're regulating the whole airspace during that time. So wouldn't it, and I don't know from a legal standpoint, if we have a FAA no-fly zone and someone's out flying the drone, then can we issue a citation based on federal law?
Well, a couple things. And Chief can go into more detail, but the FAA rep, or contact that we had, specifically requested that we have a drone ordinance in place. If the FAA has a box and it's a no-fly zone, the FAA is going to exclusively regulate that zone. But if we have a no-fly zone that's larger or closer to the hotels or whatever, we have our own no-fly zone that's in addition or supplements that, then we would have that ability to regulate that no-fly zone as well. So yes and no, is to answer your question.
So who takes responsibility for issuing the citation if we enter the FAA no-fly zone is not going to just be right off the shore. It's going to encompass the hotels and everything.
So I would defer to the Chief because I don't know.
We can't enforce FAA rules.
Right. So, and this is and Mr. O'Connell alluded to it when we went after the planes towing the banners. And eventually we spent money going to court and everything, and eventually FAA said that's not your jurisdiction. So it seems like the FAA is trying to work through this. They have some growing pains because it's big, but again, I don't want anyone who has a toy to have to call the police department to go play with their toy. And not all these are toys. I mean, you have some commercial stuff, but this doesn't specify whether it's, you know, this big or the big one.
So there is a toy drone that's defined as anything less than 0.55 pounds.
So that's the FAA
So-
rules.
And the toy drones would be those type of drones that you could get at, you know, the ones you get for your kid at Toys R Us that really aren't equipped to have cameras mounted and things like that. Then there are the larger scale drones that are defined in the ordinance that are everything else above that.
And are those the FAA regulation? Because I know they came up with weights and everything. So we're just using their stuff. I don't know. I would prefer that the feds take care of this. I don't want to go down and have to keep changing an ordinance and bringing it back or being court by someone because we took their plane.
You know, I think do we have to have this for the air show? I don't think we have to have it. Does it enhance safety? Yes. I think it enhances the safety of our pilots, especially from their view. They've been asking for this for 18 months now. I think I don't want them to call the police department every time either. If the notification is the issue, I still think there's other good parts to the ordinance that are applicable.
Well,
Again,
as Ms. Hardy said, there's the enforcement part too. I don't want, we were talking tonight about police not having enough time and everything. I don't want them running around chasing.
Agreed. I don't want them spending their time to go out and do that, but when we get a complaint or when they see a violation that happens in front of them, I want to give them a tool to deal with that complaint or deal with that safety issue. That's really what we're more looking for. The nuts and bolts of the ordinance have been debated amongst the city staff for months, and certainly we knew there wasn't going to be a unanimous agreement to all of them. There's lots of things in here we could live with or live without. We're just trying to find that right tool, and we brought this to you as a start.
And with the FAA requiring you to register, do you have any problem, if you have a downed vehicle, do you have any problem finding the owner?
No. No, I believe. I don't know that for sure, but I imagine the FAA would share that information with us if we had a need to know.
So if we did have something land on a crowd or anything, we have that information.
If it's registered, yes.
If it's registered.
Councilmember O'Connell.
Chief and the City Attorney, thank you for your work in this. And I believe in personal privacy. I'm a big believer in personal privacy rights also, and I'd love to be able to get a picture of Councilman Sullivan swimming in the swimming pool if at all possible. I think that'd be
worth it. It was you.
But and earlier on tonight, Mr. Damian Williams, who is an attorney, and I listened to what he had to say about the feds and the state are putting some laws together, and there's a quilt and patchwork of local policies being put together, and I see him sitting up here in the audience. If you wouldn't mind, Mr. Williams, would you be kind of coming down for a second? I'd just like to ask you one or two quick questions, if you don't mind.
I was hoping somebody would ask, so thank you.
Okay. First of all, I want to thank you for taking the time and coming down and speaking on this, and I'm just curious if you did read the whole policy on this, and if you could give us some feedback or some insight from what we're doing here tonight.
I did, and thank you, Councilman, for asking the question. Just as a preface, I want to answer a question that Councilmember Hardy asked about have there been any other challenges and what's happened, because I know the answer to that question. The answer is, and I hope this is helpful to your question, Councilman, there's only been one challenge in California. There's been one criminal prosecution in California brought under a local drone ordinance, and that was in the city of Los Angeles, and it was brought earlier this year against a gentleman named Arvind Chappell. And the reason why they brought this against him was because he was flying too close to the LAPD's heliport. And so they charged him with what's a misdemeanor, and they went to court, and it was immediately challenged on constitutional grounds. There was a motion to dismiss that was filed based on the fact that the FAA has preemption, which is a very technical term, which, you know, I mean, there's all sorts of information in my packet and in the staff's packet about preemption. But the bottom line is that the argument that was made was operational limitations on drone activities are preempted by the FAA. And when that motion to dismiss was filed, the city attorney dismissed the complaint and refiled it only for reckless and careless operation of a drone, because they knew that they were going to be in big trouble when it came time to trying to defend the preemption argument. So they didn't want to deal with it at that time, so instead of dealing with it, they dropped it, and they continued with careless and reckless, and it went to a jury, and the jury unanimously found in favor of the defendant. So it's a tough issue, and I have a law enforcement background. I am absolutely sensitive and supportive of the police issues, the police helicopter. There's nobody more supportive of those issues than I am. But the problem with this ordinance is that there are a lot of things in it that, number one, are preempted, and number two, they're not necessary. It's overlapping the FAA's regulations. It's overlapping or inconsistent with state criminal laws and civil laws. For example, the invasion of privacy issue. That is absolutely a legitimate issue that we should be discussing. Absolutely. And there are state laws that talk about invasion of privacy. Someone who believes that and to all of you I say, I absolutely understand the emotional aspect of this, and people who have experienced this or have heard friends or neighbors talking about having experienced it. I don't condone anyone who's flying at 50 feet over someone's pool. I'm not here to try to support any of those people. What I'm suggesting is that if you want to enact a drone ordinance, there's no problem with doing that, but let's do it in the right way. Let's do it in a way that's not going to be challenged. Somebody said, one of the council members said something about, well, I'm not sure we want to be the trailblazers. You will be the trailblazers because this will get challenged. And if you want to say, well, that's fine, we're going to forge ahead and we'll cross that bridge when we come to it, that's fine. But you don't need to go that far. There are ways that you can do this and make it so that it's not likely to be challenged. You can enact time and place restrictions. You can restrict where the drones can be taken off from and where they can be landed within the city. You can, the city has the right to enact ordinances relating to zoning, relating to use of public property. You're worried about the beach. Okay, then you enact an ordinance that says that drones are not allowed to fly, drones are not allowed to take off or land from the beach between the hours of whatever. That is an ordinance that would pass constitutional muster, and it's not infringing on the FAA's preemption because it's not an operational limitation. It's not saying you can't fly within 5 miles of X, or you can't fly within or over a certain landmark. That's where the problem is. And one of the things I wanted to point out is that in the draft ordinance, I just tried to find a couple of the ones that I had real concerns about. One of them was the provision that says, it's 8.80.070, operation over or within private property. No person shall operate a drone or toy drone within the airspace over privately owned real property or 300 horizontal feet thereof without prior written permission of the owner of the property or his agent. Okay. Let me tell you how I interpret that as being the person who's going to have to defend the person who gets charged with this section. This means that if I want to fly in my yard at 20 feet, in my front yard, this means that I have to get permission from all my neighbors. Because I honestly can't say that I know the statistics on the density of Huntington Beach, but I'm pretty sure that there's a lot of people that live in Huntington Beach that live within 300 feet of somebody else. And this doesn't say just flying over. It says within 300 horizontal feet without prior permission. So that means if I want to fly my drone in my front yard, I have to ask for permission from all my neighbors. And if my neighbors say no for whatever reason, then I'm arguably going to be on the hook for this ordinance. And by the way, just something that I noticed here that I was confused about, there was a discussion about what the penalty would be. And I'm reading this 8.80.090 penalty, and it says any person who violates or fails to comply with any of the provisions of this chapter shall be guilty of a misdemeanor. Well, that's not the same as a $100 ticket. And I respect the chief, and I absolutely support what he's trying to do, but should I, as a drone user, have to rely on the good-heartedness of the city attorney or the police department to decide, well, they're not really going to file this as a misdemeanor. They're only going to just give me a ticket, and then I'll have my $100 penalty and I'll go on my way. I don't want to be subject to a misdemeanor. I mean, so what I'm trying to say is that I support the discussion of an ordinance. It is not necessary for the air show. I put that in my supplemental packet. I hope I've tried to make it clear. A temporary flight restriction is going to be 5 miles around the location. It's going to cover all the areas you're concerned about. And the FAA is going to enforce that. And if somebody gets in the way and violates that TFR, the FAA is going to come down on them. And you know what their penalties are? It's 3 years in prison or a $250,000 fine. Okay? So it's not as urgent a need as you might think. So I don't want to go on forever. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. Definitely you want to be talking about this. But, you know, the devil is in the details, unfortunately. And in closing, let me just say one other thing, which is the National League of Cities just put out a model drone ordinance. And I didn't have a chance to submit that with my package, but I'll be happy to provide it to staff if somebody wants to look at it. And there's a discussion about this in there. And basically what the National League of Cities says is you have to be careful about not creating ordinances that are going to get in the way of preemption, but do with what you have, which is land use, you know, trespass, invasion of privacy, and those sorts of things. So I hope I've sort of given you some food for thought. I hope I didn't take up too much of your time.
Appreciate you. Thank you so much, sir. We really appreciate it.
Okay.
The contact information. Also.
You're welcome.
What about your motion there? You made a motion to continue, didn't you?
Nobody made a motion.
I'll make a motion to continue.
Yes.
Yeah, I'll make a motion to continue it so we can, sorry. Motion to continue this so we can make it.
To a date uncertain, so we can work through the issues identified and also
Perfect.
see what's happening countywide.
Yeah, great, thank you. Anyone a second?
Is there a date?
Second.
Date? You want to put a date on it? Because all right.
How do you feel about that?
Okay, second by Councilmember O'Connell. Yeah, so this is to continue this. Please vote.
Sullivan, I'm going to look for a picture of you.
The motion to continue the item to a date uncertain passes 7-0.
All right. Great discussion.